Well, I'm very excited to continue our series, Acts Facts, a Jewish journey through the book of Acts. Today, there is a tremendous story, one of my favorites in the book of Acts, certainly my favorite story one of my favorite stories within the third missionary journey of Paul. But before we get into that story, let's walk a little bit backwards in time and make sure that we are all on the same page, leaving no worshiper behind. Previously in Acts Facts, you'll remember Paul began his third missionary journey. His intent after revisiting the churches that he had established in Galatia, Phrygia, that area from Antioch, was to eventually arrive at the westernmost port of Asia Minor, and that was the great city of Ephesus. We found Paul in the city of Ephesus last week. You'll remember that after ministering for several months in the synagogue, he is eventually forced to leave the synagogue and goes next door to continue his preaching. In verse 10, this took place for 2 years, so that all who lived in Asia, that's not the Far Orient, that's not China, that's not Japan, that's not Korea, that's Asia Minor, that's what's meant here. All that lived in Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. Paul's message allowed the time to develop and percolate as it did, really began to penetrate throughout society, not just a Jewish phenomenon, not just a Gentile phenomenon, but a holistic, organic phenomenon that really took the city of not only Ephesus by storm, but surrounding cities as well, Laodicea and Colossae and various other locations, using Ephesus as a home base. Paul's entire time in the city of Ephesus is about 2.5 years, so it's quite an extraordinary ministry. It's the first time that we see him really taking that long in one location. And it tells us that God was performing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul. Paul was the instrument through whom God worked, but Paul was not an extraordinary individual in itself. It was God working through him, as with every miracle. The miracle worker is always quite secondary to the source of the miracle, and that is none other than God. So the handkerchiefs or aprons were even carried from his body to the sick, and the diseases left them, and the evil spirits went out. This is a spectacular ministry, and nothing is successful that doesn't warrant a bit of imitation, the sincerest form of flattery. And you'll remember we last saw the story of Sceva and sons, seven sons of Sceva, the Jewish priest. These are the traveling exorcists. I was going to say traveling evangelists, traveling exorcists, those who went around from town to town saying, the power of Moses compels you. The power of Moses compels you. And they saw the power that Paul had. And you remember, they said, we want a piece of that. And so they attempted to cast out a demon-possessed man using the incantation, what they thought was the incantation, in the name of Jesus, without actually believing or knowing Jesus. And the demon responds to them, well, we know Jesus, we know Paul, but who are you? And beat them up and threw them out naked, and that was quite embarrassing and humiliating. And as we said last week, you can't beat the real thing. It is God himself and his apostles and his servants that are delivering the real thing, except no substitutes, no cheap imitations. It is, and this still goes for us today, don't accept any inferior substitutes for the one true Messiah. It is Jesus, it is Yeshua alone who is God's Son, who is our Messiah, who is our way to be reconciled to God, to be redeemed, to be saved. There is only one name given among men under heaven by which we must be saved, and that is Jesus. You can't beat the real thing. Ain't nothing like the real thing, baby, right? So accept no substitutes. Many also that, well, what a talk about it. Talking about an impact, a cultural, societal impact. It's not only the real thing was happening, but people got to see what the inferior substitute spectacularly flaming out and having to leave naked and bruised and battered and bewildered. But many of those who had believed kept coming, confessing, disclosing their practices of occultism and witchcraft, and they had a big, beautiful bonfire, not of the vanities, but a bonfire of the occult. And that bonfire was worth 50,000 days' wages worth of material. It was destroyed. So the word of the Lord was growing mightily and prevailing in Asia and especially in Ephesus. And here's the new material. Now, after these things were finished, Paul purposed, in a sense that time is actually going by. After these things were finished, well, how long after? Well, Luke is always very cagey about these things, but we know that a 2.5-year ministry is compressed in basically one chapter. After these things were finished, Paul purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem after he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, saying, after I have been there, I must also see Rome. So 56 AD, that's what we're talking about. 56 AD is winter, when no one travels, began to yield to spring. Paul determined that his very successful Ephesian ministry was drawing to a close. Paul had impacted every strategic region in the northeastern sector of the Roman Empire. So he begins to plan, remember this is his third missionary journey, he begins to plan his fourth missionary journey, and as he reveals in his Roman epistle, he wants to go to Rome to see the Romans. There's a little model of Rome. Romans 1, right at the beginning, verse 9 and following. He says, for God is my witness as to how unceasingly I make mention of you, Roman believers, always in my prayers making request, if not, perhaps now, at last by the will of God, I may succeed in coming to you. This is being written to them with an anticipation that he at last is going to be able to come to Rome to see them. For I long to see you, so that I may impart some spiritual gift to you, that you may be established. Now, I don't want you to be unaware, brethren, that often I've planned to come to you. This has been part of my understanding, my desire for a long time as I've planned these missionary journeys, but one step at a time, I've often planned to come to you. I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. But he wants to build on not others' foundations, but he wants to establish fresh ground, to plow fresh sectors, to evangelize. Thus I aspire to preach the gospel, not where Christ was already named. That's why Rome was less of a priority for him, but that I would not build on another man's foundation, right? It's hard to give this illustration in Dallas, Texas. But for those of us who come from other parts of the country that deal with snow, It's okay to play in snow that other kids have been trouncing through. It's all right. You can find some, but there's nothing, baby, like virgin, unplowed, unplayed in snow, fresh and delicious. And that's how Paul felt about the evangelistic field. For this reason, I've often been prevented from coming to you. But watch this. Now, with no further place for me in these regions, I've pretty successfully taken care of establishing all the strategic locations in Asia. And since I've had for many years a longing to come to you, whenever I go to Spain, see, Spain is the unplowed. Spain is the fresh snow. But Rome is the jumping off point, is the touch point before he could go to the farthest westernmost part of the Roman Empire. But I hope to see you in passing, like an extended layover, and be helped on my way there by you. And yes, you can pay some of my expenses, by the way. I'm giving you fair warning. When I have first enjoyed your company for a while, we'll spend a little time together. You'll support me a little bit, and then I'm going to go plow some fresh evangelistic snow in Spain. But prior to attempting such an ambitious mission to go that further west, in fact, Spain, as you can tell, is so far west, it's off the map. There are 3 locations that actually took priority that he wanted to spend some more time with in Paul's itinerary. The first location is Macedonia. He had been there, and then he planned to go back and strengthen the churches that he had previously planted, and in the second missionary journey. And the second location, speaking of the second missionary journey, the region of Achaia, specifically Corinth. That's the Peloponnesian Peninsula down at the foot, these three fingers that stick out at the base of Greece, the Peloponnesian Peninsula, and he wanted very much to strengthen that church of Corinth. We know that because of the 2 major letters. These are not small letters. These are really chunky, beefy, substantial letters that he sends from Ephesus to Corinth. And Paul determined to collect from these churches an offering. He wants to strengthen them, but also he wants to collect an offering to deliver to the mother church in Jerusalem, which is going to be his third location. So he wants to go to Macedonia, Achaia, and back to Jerusalem to deliver a gift. Now, look at 1 Corinthians 16, 1-4. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, that's the Jerusalem believers, the mother church, as I directed the churches of Galatia, Asia Minor, right? So also I direct you in Achaia, in Corinth. On the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so that no collection be made when I come. In other words, do not leave it for the last moment. I want you to start collecting now, and don't leave it for when I arrive and everybody, okay, well, we're going to take an ad hoc collection for the church in Jerusalem. No, put some thought, put some effort into it, because that's part of my plan. Paul is a master planner. Right? You couldn't accomplish what Paul accomplishes in 3 decades without being the master planner that he is. Think about it. There's just a little bit over 3 decades between him coming to faith and his death. And look what he accomplished. Well, when I arrive, whomever you may approve, I will send them with letters to carry your gift to Jerusalem. And if it's fitting for me to go also, they will go with me. But he wants to remain in Ephesus a short while longer, because he's going to you can't just abandon something you worked for 2.5 years. He's going to tie up the loose ends of his ministry. I'll remain in Ephesus until Pentecost. When is Pentecost? Anyone? Shavuot? It's in the spring. It's after Passover. Somebody said it. 50 days after The week of Passover, yes. I'll remain in Ephesus until Pentecost. It's a great time to travel, but also one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals when the Jewish people are going to be coming en masse to Jerusalem. And for a wide door, but I'm not going to leave before that. A wide door of effective service is open to me, and, well, there are many adversaries. And having sent into Macedonia 2 of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, so he sends ahead Timothy and Erastus. He himself, Paul, stayed in Asia, Ephesus specifically, for a while. Now, we know Timothy, we know him well. Erastus I've mentioned before, and he's worth mentioning again because he's mentioned as well in Romans 16:23. Gaius, host to me and to the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, greets you. Quartus, the brother. And in 2 Timothy 4:20, Erastus remained at Corinth, but Trophimus I left sick at Miletus. Now, Erastus is the treasurer, city treasurer of Corinth, the prominent and wealthy citizen of Corinth. And I showed you this before, I'll show you again. We actually, you can see this, the paving stone with Erastus's name, that, Erastus paid for this, sponsored by Erastus. Where is this stone? It's right there. You can see that little paving area in the forefront, right there in the shadow of the Acro Corinth. In Corinth itself, you can see the remains of that large stone plaza. Today, Erastus paid for that with his own expense. So Paul, again, to summarize, Paul intended to stay in Ephesus, to extend his stay in Ephesus, but God had alternate plans. So it's interesting to see, because Paul committed himself to writing, this is what I planned, but now Luke reveals to us what actually took place. We can make all the plans that we want, but it is God who directs our steps. God who directs the circumstances surrounding our lives and our lives' decisions. It's a good lesson for us to learn. Even somebody like Paul, he didn't have that tight a pipeline. Paul himself didn't know what the future held, had some ideas, rough understanding, but God moved Paul as he moves all of us, directed Paul as he directs all of us, as he, not necessarily we, wills. Well, let me show you what I mean, or let Luke show you what I mean. About that time, there occurred no small disturbance. I love Lucas. He uses this phrase a couple times. No small. In other words, the master of understatement. There occurred no small disturbance. In other words, being translated, what he means is, well, there arose a big fat Ephesian riot about this time. No small disturbance, a big fat Ephesian riot. Now, we mentioned this last time, as we saw this phrase earlier in the chapter, and we see it again. The early church, referred to by Luke as the way, one of Luke's preferred terms for the early church before everyone had decided that Christians and Christianity was going to be the finalized name for the early believers. So here comes, this is the colon. No small disturbance concerning the way. And he's going to lay it on us. Let's get ready. For a man named Demetrius. This is not Demetrius and the Gladiators like Victor Mature in the movie, which I see all of 2 of you have seen. But it's good. It's one of the good 50s Bible movies. a man named Demetrius. He's a silversmith. He made silver shrines of Artemis, was bringing no little business to the craftsmen. So let's unpack this statement. Demetrius the silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis. Let's talk about silver shrines, then let's talk about Artemis. Because when we talk about this, we're talking about big business in the ancient world of Ephesus. Now, if you look in the corner, you see what looks like a little hut or a little kiosk. You expect to see somebody selling tickets, or maybe the puppet who wants to tell your fortunes, come up, stick a quarter in there, and he'll tell you. This is a shrine. When we talk about Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, this is a shrine for silver figures to be placed in the shrine. This is somebody's living room. This is Pompeii. This is not Ephesus, but nonetheless, it's a great example of the kind of shrines that there were in the ancient world. And so you had this little home shrine. So instead of having the shrine of your home, which I know everybody knows what the shrine of your home is, it's the 65-inch television. We all know what the central focus of your living room is. In the 21st century in America, we all sit and worship passively in this shrine, unless, of course, the Cowboys are not playing well, in which case we get a little bit more animated. But nonetheless, they had these shrines built in to their homes. And in those shrines, they would place figures. And this is a drawing of what it would have looked like in someone's home. Now, this happens to be just in a garden area, in an external area, and they would sit, and you can see in the shrine is a lovely statue. Now, this is an example of how these shrines worked, and so you had these lovely little pediments or lovely little areas that were built that were fancy, schmancy, really, fancy, little homes, little dollhouse, if you will. And in a little dollhouse, little setup, you would place the god or goddesses, and you can see there are several figures that are displayed there. And you would bring, you would worship it, and you would pray to the gods and goddesses in the shrine. You would bring them gifts of food and flowers and what have you. And you can see they're arranged somewhat like I have my superhero action figures arranged on my shelves, except I don't pray to the maybe Batman. No, I don't pray to the superheroes. I don't worship them. These gods and goddesses were indeed worshipped. And you can see silver figurines that you can see. Some of us have superheroes. Some of us have Hummel figurines. Some of you, now I remember back in the 90s and the 80s, everybody used to shop at the Christian stores, and you had all these little Christian figurines that people would put up, and they didn't have faces. And you remember some of these. But a lot of people had them on the fireplace and on the shelves and whatever, knickknacks. Paddywhack, give your dog a bone. But these were not just for show. These were for worship. These were to safeguard your home. And of course, Artemis was the great figure of that day. And Artemis is not to be confused with the alternate Roman version, whose name is Diana. Okay? The Roman version, Diana, is beautiful. It's right here. Beautiful, virginal, goddess of nature. Although some of our translations will translate Artemis as Diana, this is not the goddess that they worship. This is the sanitized version that was for the Romans, The ones that the Ephesians worshiped, the Artemis that it was ugly, misshapen, multi-breasted. Those are not cancerous tumors, okay? Multi-breasted goddess of fertility, called the Great Mother. Here are other versions of Artemis as worshipped in the ancient world of Asia, the time of Paul. She was the big mama, literally, of Ephesus and of that entire region. See, even her figure is on a coin. You have Caesar on one side of the coin, heads, and tails, the Great Mother. In this instance, because it's printed by Rome, it's Diana of Ephesus, of Ephesia. But that is most assuredly not the virginal hunting goddess that the Romans worship. That is the ugly, multi-breasted Great Mother of Ephesus. This is a reproduction model of the Artemision, the home of Artemis. Those of you who have seen the greatness that is left, the ruins of the Parthenon in Athens. The Parthenon was a candy store compared to the size of the Artemision. The Parthenon was kid stuff compared to the humongous size of the Artemision. The long side of the Parthenon, the buildings are rectangular, so the long side of the Parthenon is about the size of the short side of the Artemision. To give you a sense of scale, let me show you, there is another ruin of an Artemision, of a shrine, a temple to Artemis that's found in Jordan. We see this when we go to Jordan. It's in Jerish, one of the places that if we do a Jordan extension from our Israel tour, we take you there. And you can see the scale of this on the look at the center of the steps. And in the corner of the bottom of the steps, you actually see a couple of people sitting, okay? That gives you an idea of scale. Massive! And that's just the ruins. This is a column drum of what was one of the columns in the Artemision. Huge, humongous. You couldn't hug it. It's like hugging a redwood. This is all that's left today. Just a reconstructed, those are pieces of columns, and they have a hole in the center, and you put them all like a big shish kebab, and you line them up and you drop them, and they stand like that, and you can see they're not necessarily fit together. This is just the pieces, all that is left of the pieces. So this column, as ugly, as misshapen as the multi-breasted goddess of fertility, Artemis in Ephesians. So back to our story. A man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Artemis, was bringing no little business to the craftsmen. This is big business that we're talking about, but as more and more Ephesians became followers of Jesus and didn't need those shrines and didn't need the figures, well, the pool of Artemis worshipers, they began to shrink noticeably. And that deeply cut into the bottom line of those whose livelihoods, like Demetrius, like the craftsman, depended on, was built upon goddess worship. So Demetrius is likely the leader of the local crafts guild, and he calls a union meeting for his fellow artisans of idolatry. These he gathered together with the workmen of similar trades and said, "Men, you know that our prosperity depends upon this business. This is our livelihood. Our prosperity depends upon this business." So, calls this union meeting together, and they determine, and he informs his colleagues that it's the economy, stupid. Paul has gone too far. Turned away hordes of Artemis worshipers, former Artemis worshipers, who now worship this invisible God. Invisible God, that's hard to make something with silver. The influence is cutting into our business. It's not really, think about it, not a religious issue per se. Live and let live. It's an economic one. Paul represents a threat to the craftsman's personal livelihood, to their families, to their pocketbooks, and to the Ephesian municipal economy. The Chamber of Commerce is upset as well. You can see the context of Paul's preaching against idolatry simply by reading something as basic as Isaiah 44:9 and 11. You see the context of what Paul is preaching by the reaction that Demetrius is sharing in his union meeting. Paul is a biblically literate Jew, exceptionally well-educated rabbi. I'm sure he would have quoted extensively from Isaiah and his denunciation of idolatry, which reads shortly as follows. I'm just taking a couple of pieces. "Those who fashion graven images are all of them futile, and their precious things are of no profit." Well, profit to the craftsmen, but no profit to those who buy them. "Even their own witnesses fail to see or know, so that they will be put to shame. Behold, all his companions will be put to shame, for the craftsmen themselves are mere men." What kind of guys? Here's a human being crafting a god? What kind of God is this? What kind of gods are these? "Let them all assemble themselves. Let them stand up. Let them tremble. Let them together be put to shame. Shame on you. Shame on you." What are Demetrius and his fellow guildsmen, his fellow craftsmen, to do? Unfortunately for Demetrius and his companions, they couldn't wait they didn't have the patience to wait a few more centuries until the time when silversmiths and goldsmiths could forever sustain a living designing lovely silver or gold crosses, crucifixes, assorted Christian medallions. If only Paul, with all his visionary prowess, could have foreseen the Christian jewelry industry. He could have provided a whole alternate stream of revenue for Ephesus, thus averting this big fat Ephesian riot that's going to break out, this threat to his life. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Had the wearing of religious jewelry for Christians even been conceivable for the first century church, the renowned Ephesian artisans could have innovated a completely new product line, never before seen, maybe even a cross cleverly inserted within a Jewish star to serve the new Jewish Christian constituents. Something forever. Now, this is not a condemnation, right? This is not a diatribe against Christian fashion. My great Aunt Hilda, missionary to the Jewish people for over 40 years, a great mentor in my life. She had a thing about Christian jewelry, and she once told me that if Jesus had been crucified on a cross of gold, then and only then would she consider wearing one. But until that point, she will avoid wearing Christian jewelry. It's an interesting thing. Well, Demetrius is going to go on. You see in here that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul, this is troublemaker, Paul has persuaded and turned away a considerable number of people. Can you imagine that he says that gods made with hands are no gods at all? Yeah, that's exactly a good representation of what Paul is teaching. Absolutely. That's straight out of the Isaiah 44 passage. Not only is there danger that this trade of ours falls into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis be regarded as worthless, and that she whom all of Asia and the world worship will even be dethroned from her magnificence. So, building upon the economic grievance against the Christians, he appealed to not only religious pride, but municipal patriotism. If Paul devalues the great goddess Artemis in the eyes of the world, the most popular goddess in the ancient world, but she could be dethroned, she could fall from her preeminence in the pantheon. Once the word circulated of her humiliation at the hands, at the mouth of this lowly Jewish rabbi. So Demetrius succeeds in whipping his audience into a frenzy, as we are about to see. When they heard this, and they were filled with rage, they began crying out, saying, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." And a riot began. The city became flooded with chaos and confusion. It's not hard to whip a crowd, to manipulate a crowd into a rage, and once enraged, into a riot. It's mass hysteria. It's as older than the book from which we read. Crowds are predictable things, humans being what they are. They are easily manipulated by propaganda and by someone who passionately makes his point. If passion did not move people to action, then I ask you, how in the 90s and the early 2000s, how did the juice man sell so many units? By the passion with which he preached the gospel of juicing and his very bushy eyebrows. We see crowds in our day so easy to manipulate, so easy to move, so easy to orchestrate. And as now, so then. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Substitute another slogan for our day. Defund the police. No justice, no peace. So many others. Crowds are crowds. But when you find yourself in a city that is gripped by this kind of riot, it's a very dangerous place to be. We've all lived through recent events, the past year or 2. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. The city was filled with the confusion. And they rushed with one accord into the theater. How they all fit into one accord, I'll never know. They rushed with one accord into the theater. Thank you, I'll be here all week. Dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia. So they couldn't locate the source of their fury. They're searching, they're looking, they're walking through city streets. I'll show you in a moment the main thoroughfares and how they lead to the theater. Unable to locate the source of their fury, Paul, this meddlesome Jew, the crowd instead snatched up 2 of Paul's companions, Gaius and Aristarchus, and they dragged them into the great theater of Ephesus. Now, if you'll notice, there is an avenue that runs directly through the city, right, and deposits you right to that great theater. The great theater is carved right into the hillside there. It's an extraordinary thing. And let me see if the next picture will show you. No, I'm afraid I did. If you can see at the corner, there's a whole nother, so you've got an axis running this way, but then you have, at the corner, you have the main agora, the main thoroughfare running this way. So all you need to do is march down Main Street and then take a right on First Street, or whatever these streets were called, I don't know. And you wind up at the great theater just off that colonnaded avenue. Theater could hold 24,000 spectators. Of course, it's been excavated. You can see it today. I've been there many times. This is, I didn't take this picture. I don't have a drone. I don't have an airplane, a helicopter. But this is an overview of the great theater, excavated as it is today, give you a sense of the size and the scale. This is the other avenue. The harbor is down that way, and as you walk from the harbor, which was at that time not that far, now it's quite far because of erosion of the sea. Land has expanded. Now you walk through here and you can hit the great theater. Another picture, I want you to just imagine the crowds in Ephesus literally filling that theater, and an enraged mob filling the theater with their fury. These are the cheap seats. This is the view from the cheap seats right here. Yes. That, by the way, that is the way to the harbor. You can see it way out in the distance there. That is just a view from the cheap seats. That's my sister-in-law and my niece. Down at the bottom now, to give you a sense of scale and size, my adorable niece, who is now grown. And yes, isn't she cute? Oh yes, she is. Well, when Paul wanted to go into the assembly, the disciples would not let him. The mob occupied the theater for several hours, from Luke's account. Good percentage of the city is up in arms. And gathered within the city, total chaos and confusion reigned. Multiple slogans chanted, like with so many mob situations. Much of the mob had been propelled into the theater, were not even aware of the ostensible grounds of the riot. But Paul wanted to go into the assembly, face them head on, boldly, where no rabbi had gone before. But he's restrained by the Ephesian believers, likely including Priscilla and Aquila, his friends, and some of the Asiarchs, some of the Ephesian municipal leaders also said, not only a friend, but the friends that he had in the government, They sent him, repeatedly urged him, do not go into the theater. It will not go well for you in the theater. By the way, the fact that Paul had friends among the municipal leaders, the Asiarchs, indicates that the Roman government did not perceive Christianity as a threat, in contrast to the common populace, as you can see. Well, but then, so confused, because there's nothing as confused as an enraged mob, particularly when half the people really don't know what everybody's worked up about, but it looks like, oh, this is exciting, so I'll get worked up too. That's why sometimes you see a video of people protesting, and they're protesting, and they're so angry, and they're so enraged, and they're so passionate, and somebody goes up to them and says, what exactly is your problem with with so-and-so, or what's your problem with this issue? I don't know. But I'm protesting, and I feel very passionately about it. So some were shouting one thing, and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and the majority did not know for what reason they had come together. But come together they had, and angry, enraged, and extremely dangerous they were. Will Paul enter? Will he ignore the directives of his friends and the government officials? Will he plunge headlong into danger? Will he withstand the thrill and the threat of the enraged Ephesian mob? I'm afraid for now I'm going to have to leave you in suspense. We will find out together how the story ends. But for right now, we have some prayers.